this week's episode of the Dublin to Denver podcast with me, Colum. We are in August. Um, Training camp is now well underway, and every day seems to bring a new Broncos injury scare, and every day seems to bring a new story about a Bronco who underwent off-season surgery. Joining me to discuss the early parts of training camp and delve into perhaps some of the injury stories. I am joined, as always, by my friend, colleague, and co-host Stuart Roach. Stuart, how are you doing, sir?
Colum, I'm doing very well. Glad to see you back from Valhalla. We followed your Scandinavian trip with great interest. You managed to leave at around the same time as our well, certainly my prediction for Camp Darling. Caleb Lohner has taken a massive hit because he hasn't practiced at all because he's been injured in every day up to this point, which all joking aside isn't good news for a guy who's trying to make a 53-man roster. So you'd have to say that he's really up against it now. But yeah, like it did seem, Colin, towards the end of your holiday, it did seem like every day brought yet another injury scare. Now, touch wood, up to this point, it seems like we've avoided anything particularly nasty. There has been some really, you get it every time of year around this time, but you just hope it doesn't happen to you. But like Chris Brazel, I think the rookie wide receiver who I think at one point the Broncos were being sort of seriously linked with before we went out and traded for Waddle. He's done for the season. I think Walker, the pass rusher from I forget where, he's done for the season as well. So you've already had a couple of significant injuries. Ours haven't been significant yet, touch wood, but it does just hammer home, Colin, the precarious nature of a sport that in the blink of an eye, huge amounts of your off-season plans can go up in smoke. So we seem to have dodged, I think at least at this time of counting, Colin, 3 bullets. You'd just be worried, given the law of averages, that the next time somebody goes down, it might be more significant. So hopefully now we will steer clear of that. I'm not entirely sure if it was pre-planned, but yesterday they went back to without pads because at one point, I think the day before when they had full pads, it got very chippy. A couple of people went down injured, so maybe yesterday was a little bit of an insurance policy and sort of take a foot off the pedal, because the people that, just to recap for the listeners who may have missed it, but 3 very important players came down with injuries: Colum, Wattenberg, Nick Benito, and then Jalen Waddle. Now, as I said, none of these are significant. They were all out practicing. Sorry, they were all out at practice. They didn't practice themselves. And on each occasion, Sean Payton said they would be fine, and that has proven to be the case. But fingers crossed from here on in. It'd be lovely if there was no news on that front for the next while. So, ironically, Colin, given that everybody seemed to be fixated on Bo Nix's ankle in the lead up to training camp, there hasn't been nary a mention of that, apart from the fact that he looks even faster when he's breaking out of the pocket than he has in previous years. So all good there. But yeah, quite a lot to get through. And there's a few people who, Colin, I think have flashed, and there's a few people who, I wouldn't go as far as to say disappointed, but there's a few people who probably need to do a little bit more if they're going to play a significant role in the team in the coming months.
Yeah, I suppose, Stuart, the hope is that Sean Payton is proved correct, and it will all be fine. Though we know that the Broncos play their cards very close to their chest. Sean Payton does that. The Broncos PR does that. The Broncos, one of the teams who have the held do no recording at training camp, asking fans not to record plays. And Stuart, I don't know if you like. I came across this while I was on holiday, and I don't know if you'd seen it, but I was unaware that Cortland Sutton had off-season surgery. I had been unaware until a few weeks back when it emerged that RJ Harvey had off-season surgery. Obviously, we're aware of the Bo Nix piece, but there's significant injury concerns now across the offense. And obviously, look, the hope is that all this will be fine, and fingers crossed, and lucky rabbit's foot and whatever else we need to do. But the reality is we've been QB coming back off of a broken ankle. RB1 is coming back off a major injury. Or RB2 also had off-season surgery. Wide receiver 1 had off-season ankle surgery, and wide receiver 2 had, picks up niggles here and there. It's got to be something of a concern, especially with the injury to Wattenberg, which might be the center, might be the one area, like outside of Bowles, might be the one area on the offensive line where we really don't have ideal cover. So you've also got with the Benito piece and another player who had off-season surgery yet again. And obviously the team decided that Jonathan Cooper, they're going to just let that play out, but that doesn't, the NFL may decide on a suspension, or they may decide to let it play out. But we are going into a season coming off the back of, 2 years, up until what, say, December of last year, when Dobbins goes down, or November with Dobbins and obviously Bo Nix. But we'd really ridden our injury luck. But obviously there's nothing we can do about it. But does it concern you at all with the number of off-season surgeries and that it's on both sides of the ball?
I can't answer that question fully, Colin, for the simple reason I'm not entirely sure the level of surgery that was required for most of these players outside of Bo Nix. Clearly, there was no way that they could kind of keep that one under wraps, obviously, because it was the biggest injury the Broncos have suffered. You'd have to say in probably a decade, Colin. So I don't really know. I mean, if they're just cleanup procedures, then it's probably not the end of the world. And in fairness, they'd all started the camp, so it would probably look like those procedures had gone fine. And you're with a player like Jalen Waddle, Colin, I think somebody who is as explosive and who is as I wouldn't say reliant on speed, but it's a key part of his game. Unfortunately, those kind of niggles are kind of always going to be there, but I don't think that's particularly serious. But look, we, as you said, we've had a great run of it, and I think a lot of credit goes to the strength and conditioning staff. One of Sean's earliest moves was to replace the previous incumbent, who seemed to have been more akin to a cult leader than a fitness coach, given the amount of players that went out of their way to talk about how good he was. And then Broncos training camp resembled the Battle of the Somme. Most summers he was there. So you have to give credit to Sean, and you have to give credit to the people he's put in place. Touch wood, we've gotten really, a great run of it in regards to steering clear of major injury. But that can turn, Colum, as we've seen. Also, you've got to factor in people like Cortland Sutton. He's not as young as he used to be. So maybe they're managing him. I mean, you probably missed it, Colum, but there was huge, almost Hercule Poirot-esque sort of investigations into why exactly Cortland Sutton had two veteran days off in a row, and there didn't seem to be much more to it than that. So, look, this is a strange time in that, real football in inverted commas is almost back, and then you kind of get excited about it. And the Broncos are going to be playing a preseason game quite soon, Colin. But then you see real football last night in the Hall of Fame game, and let's be honest, most teams are keeping their powder dry. You're getting a bit of a run out for your first team at some point, but look, this is about putting sort of new sort of plays and schemes in place, and it's about getting new players acclimatized and stuff like that. So we'll have to keep an eye on it, Colin. But look, the fact that you're looking at, as you said, the list of players that you mentioned, I mean, these are key pieces. Like Forsyth can step in and do a job if Wattenberg is out for a little bit longer. But Forsyth is not as good a player as Wattenberg. I do remember last year everybody lost their minds. Well, Palcho did quite well when he came in for Ben Powers, and then Stink felt compelled to just just remind everybody that Ben Powers is a vastly superior guard to Palcho. Palcho did a good job in relief, but that's what it was. So, as I said, the space of 3 or 4 days, you lost key members went down. Now it doesn't seem like it's serious, but as I alluded to earlier on, Colum, you'd like to see us get a run now where we don't have to worry about somebody getting injured, because it is a concern. We've seen so many times where, you have to look back, Colum. Do you remember? I think just because YouTube it flashed up, there was highlights, and I use that word very loosely, of Super Bowl 48, and of course, everybody's going to keep remembering about the Seahawks defense and what they did to us. But the Broncos were absolutely crippled by injuries by the time they got to the Super Bowl, particularly on defense. But also, and what is never mentioned is possibly the best left tackle in football was Ryan Clady. And he went down, I think, in game 1 or 2 of that season. And everybody looks back and they see 43-8 and an absolute shellac. And you go, yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying the Seahawks wouldn't have won that Super Bowl. They would have, probably, because it was just a bad matchup for the Broncos, but it would have been a damn sight closer if we'd been able to play our full hand. So look, hopefully this is the end of it now. The chances are it isn't, Colum. The chances are one significant player probably will go down, but I don't know. Maybe, as I said, maybe the fact that they switched back to no pads yesterday might have been Sean or whoever kind of decided to ease the foot off the accelerator a little bit, because by all accounts that full pads practice the other day was pretty aggressive from both sides. There was a lot of chipping, and that sounds great as well, but you just don't want to lose any key pieces at this stage, Colin, because this is a Super Bowl window, and I think everybody assumes that the Rams are going to be the NFC's representatives, but the AFC is wide open, Colin. There's absolutely no reason why we can't get there this year, but we do need a good run in regards to injuries. So hopefully this is the end of it now for some time.
Yeah, and obviously the Rams look like they will be bringing Aaron Donald back, having had a visit. Now, I don't like Aaron Donald is a freak in the truest sense of the word, so it's tough to know. Most people obviously, I think Philip Rivers last year it was kind of a cuddly story initially. I think if you look back and you look at some of the performances, I don't think they quite stand up, but Aaron Donald, having been away, having kept in check, and with Myles Garrett there, that will be quite something. They truly they will have assembled and a formidable roster if he does end up coming back.
Yeah, but Colin, the one thing is, if Matthew Stafford, who has had injury issues over the last couple of seasons, if he goes down, then it's not going to count for anything, because that's the way they have assembled that team. It looks like one of the all-time greats. But a bad block in training camp, somebody lands the wrong way, Stafford's gone, and they're done, because there just isn't anybody out there they're going to get, as the Colts discovered to their cost last year.
Indeed. The other piece, Jordan, interested in your take, because I was away, I was traveling. You never get to see these things, but I haven't seen great reports on our first round pick from last year, and I'm interested in hearing.
Well, that's where you're wrong, my friend. That's where you're wrong, because it seems like there was a little bit of that smoke was beginning to sort of accumulate in the building, and then Jade had himself a day yesterday, and by had himself a day I mean he broke up one pass and gave Pat Bryant a bit of a clatter. But apart from so that constitutes had himself a day now by all accounts. But no. Yeah, he's now. Look, Colin, there is an argument to be said that a cornerback is not unlike a centre half in football. That if you're not mentioning their name, they're actually doing their job well. But unfortunately for Jade, Riley Moss and Macmillan have been balling out. You don't even mention Pat Surtain, there's no point. But the two boys have been balling out by all accounts, and Jade hasn't been. He's just seemingly just sort of been another guy, and they're still trying him at nickel, and they're still playing him outside. And if reports are to be believed, Colum, and we have to believe them, in fairness, Riley Moss looks outstanding at the moment, and Jade is just another guy right now. So look, there's still time, but I made a prediction that Riley Moss would lose his place to Jade Barron, and it wasn't really based on confidence in Jade's play. It was more his draft position, but at the moment there's little or no sign of that happening.
The cope that I have seen in places, Stewart, is that we don't need him this year. It's all about next year when they inevitably move on from Moss or from JMac. Not sure if using the 20th pick in the draft on a guy that sits for 2 years is where you want to be. Particularly as he wasn't a young corner, right? He was an older prospect coming in, and we know that cornerback is potentially the position where the it is so difficult to remain a top cornerback as you age. The reality is that position, and the NFL have made it so tough. Like, the rules favor the offense all of the time. We've talked about it before. The days of Revis Island are long gone. The rules just don't allow that to be the case anymore. So was there anything else that you saw either in training camp or around other stories involving the Broncos this week that jumped out at you?
There was a little bit about Barron, actually, Colum, interestingly enough, that I thought you would particularly find intriguing, was that Broncos were genuinely shocked when he was still on the board when they came to pick a 20, and they didn't really seem to have planned for him to be there. So they had to take him because he was that good. He just couldn't be passed up. And maybe that explains the fact that they've not really known how to use him properly. That sounds like absolute horse manure to me, and sounds like a continuation of the dear God, let's come up with some kind of reasons as to why we drafted a cornerback at 20 when it was a position of absolutely no need, when there were others. So the Peace Mide's fingerprints seem to be kind of all over that one. But I did think of you when I saw that. No, I think, Colin, what's been interesting was that there is consensus amongst a lot of the reporters that certain players are really beginning to kind of put in some really, really good work. And two of them, I think, are vying probably for the same position, in that Pat Bryant and Marvin Mims. So obviously you've got Cortland and you've got Waddle, and this is before the injuries. And again, I don't, injuries is probably too strong, but the tweaks probably before they struck. But both Bryant and Mims seem like they're really putting together a strong body of work, and both making cases to be wide receiver 3. But I think Bryant probably isn't a huge surprise, Colin, because I think he's what you would call a steady Eddie. You get what you see on the tin from Bryant, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I think he's a fine player, and was very impressed with him down the stretch last year. But I do think the usage of Marvin Mims, and maybe this is the Davis Webb effect beginning to kick in. But Mims, I think, has been used in all kinds of interesting ways. A lot of pre-snap stuff. Utilizing his strengths, and I think if you pair him with Waddle, then you're going to give opposing defenses nightmares, because that's two players that have genuine gas that you've put onto the field. So you're going to ask a lot of serious questions. The other one is that the run game is looking a lot better. Jonah Coleman is turning heads, which I think is very important. Now I know J.K. Dobbins has given us a pinky promise that his injuries are behind him. And as you well know, Colin, the pinky promise is absolutely legally binding, so we should be fine. But by all accounts, Jonah Coleman is doing exactly what you would hope of him, given the sort of profile he had coming out of the draft. RJ Harvey continues to be an elite weapon coming out of the backfield as a receiver. Haven't really heard much about RJ Harvey as a runner, but I think that's actually okay now, given that we have a little bit of of insurance there with Colum. But and Evan Ingram, I think, had a good start to camp. Colum. Then the ball didn't seem to be put his way too much. But I think in the last couple of days, it looks like that's been addressed, and Evan Ingram is beginning to show out as well. So, these are positions of real importance from the offense column. I think the defense is it sounds like it's going to be okay. Eswarike, Savion Jones, Onyedem look like they're doing their bit. I don't think any of them are going to be John Franklin Myers anytime soon, but I think as a collective they can help. And hopefully there won't be a huge tail off. And I think Red Murdoch looks like he's doing okay as third linebacker. But yeah, I think the Mims usage, the Evan Ingram showing his head, Coleman, they were the ones that I was kind of particularly interested in, Colin, because I do think we need to get that offense up and running quickly, and I do think Davis Webb has been talking about that. And the Broncos as an offensive unit have been at pains to kind of stress how they're going to try to start much quicker this season, because I think they know they have to, given that stretch of 6 games to open. So, I mean, they were the things that kind of stood out for me. Not a huge amount else. Obviously, the drone tour of the new facilities is spectacular. If you haven't had an opportunity to see that, the team are certainly going to be well looked after, and it's quite a sensational building, and the facilities really are second to none. The only other thing was, it was great to see Mike Shanahan at training yesterday, and as some wag on social media pointed out, if the Broncos want to improve their run game, then they might want to have a chat with Shanahan Senior about how to plug in and play a guy that you pick up off the street and get to go for 1,000 yards year after year after year.
Indeed, that is very, very true. The other piece I was going to mention, Mike Shanahan, Stuart, because Matt Verderam, who writes for Sports Illustrated, which isn't what it once was. But he, in fairness, I've interviewed him previously. I know Broncos fans aren't his biggest fan because he is a Chiefs fan himself, though I think his coverage a lot of the time is very good. I do think he maybe is a bit harsh on Bo Nix at times, but I think overall his coverage is very good. He did a really interesting piece for Sports Illustrated, whereby Stuart, he spoke to a number of Hall of Famers. He spoke to 8 Hall of Fame voters and asked for their biggest snubs. That I thought an interesting premise to begin with already, and it had to be you had to have been eligible. So he wasn't going to get Belichick, right? Because Belichick obviously 1 year. So it's looking at guys who I suppose have been kind of repeatedly snubbed. And I will go. So I'll go through. I'll just go quickly through the top 5. Right, at 5 is Terry Holt, wide receiver, who played with the Rams for the majority of his career, and then had 1 year with the Jags. At 4th is Maxi Bowen, linebacker, played with the Eagles, the Rams, and with Washington way back in the 60s, and play into the early 70s. If we go then to number 3 is somebody, a very recognizable name, and that is Reggie Wayne. Obviously legendary Colts wide receiver. And then if we go to number 2, it's Mike Holmgren, who was with coaching the Packers and the Seahawks. And then, Stuart, I think you can probably guess who number 1 is. Head and shoulders above all the rest, it is one Mike Shanahan. It is we have spoken about it at length over the years. It is truly perplexing. It is 13 years um, since Mike Shanahan retired, and 10 coaches have been finalists in that time. 6 have been enshrined. Jimmy Johnson, Bill Cowher, Tom Flores, Don Corral, Dick Vermeil, and Tony Dungy. Now, Stuart, I think, okay, one might look at that and one might say Jimmy Johnson, right? Given the legacy that he built at the Cowboys, okay, I can get it, right? Um, but but nobody else, to my mind, is as deserving as Shanahan, right? I'm not saying that they don't have cases, and they don't deserve to go in there, sure, but Mike Shanahan, you know, he won two Super Bowls. Um, he he revolutionized the running game. He created concepts that are still in use in the league today. And yeah, I remain uh, absolutely baffled by it. People keep saying that it is a matter of time, but it's been an awfully long time coming, and I don't know when it'll change, because ultimately, Stuart, I think that the Belichick snub will be rectified in 2027. So I don't know where that leaves Mike Shanahan.
It's crazy, Colin, because occasionally I actually forget that Mike Shanahan has been snubbed from the Hall of Fame, because you just assume he's there, because by any sort of gauge or metric, he ought to be. Particularly the list of coaches that you mentioned that got in ahead of him. I would agree with you. I think Jimmy Johnson, he won 2 Super Bowls. Arguably, he probably won 3 Super Bowls, because that was pretty much his team. That Switzer won it with 2 years later, and so many Hall of Fame players that he personally drafted, and was largely responsible, despite Jerry Jones claiming it was his idea for the Herschel Walker trade, which completely just changed the path of that franchise. But apart from that, Colin, I would have taken none of those other coaches ahead of Mike Shanahan. And you don't want to become a conspiracy theorist, but there was, for a long stretch of time, Colin, a massive underrepresentation of Denver Broncos in the Hall of Fame. Now it was rectified in recent years, and I think that maybe sometimes then there's a pushback against it. It's like, well, the Broncos have had their fill now for a while. But like, as you say, Belichick is almost nailed on to get in the next time he's available. And like, you also forget with Shanahan that, he was the offensive coordinator, Column, for that 49ers Super Bowl against the San Diego Chargers, where Steve Young looked like he would have hit just about every pass on the call sheet if it had been called in the game. He was immaculate in that Super Bowl. Steve Young, who couldn't get the job done up to that point. And Shanahan was on the Denver Broncos staff for most of the Super Bowl trips to the 80s as well, Colin. So there's Super Bowl after Super Bowl after Super Bowl on the guy's CV. And as you say, he revolutionized the run game. And, I jokingly said and Gibbs was also a huge part of that as well. But like, the way they were able to get running backs just to come in, guys that obviously Terrell Davis is a Hall of Famer in his own right, but you get like Mike Anderson, people like that, late round draft picks. I mean, just come in, Tatum Bell, guys like that were, not highly touted out of college. And you only have to look at his Shanahan's coaching tree is not really mentioned, Colum. And maybe it's just because I'm reading that book by Mike Silver, which I recommended a couple of weeks ago, The Why Is All. But like, Shanahan's coaching tree just is it's become a huge sort of breeding ground in the NFL for excellence. And obviously his son is the prime example of that. And I know he's been a 2-time loser in the Super Bowl 3 times if you count the Falcons as well as offensive coordinator. But like, not everything is just solely about winning Super Bowls, Colin. There's other things that go into this as well. So look, it is preposterous. As I say, occasionally I forget that Mike Shanahan, one would assume that he was nailed on. But also then, Colin, you have to go back to stuff where I think, was it Woody Page who was supposedly was talking to John Elway towards the end of his career, and Elway said, look, what are my Hall of Fame chances? And he said, well, 2 things you need to do, John, is one, you need to win one Super Bowl at least, and the other is not to retire the same year as Dan Marino. And I think it was kind of half tongue in cheek by all accounts. There was a genuine concern that maybe Elway wouldn't get in because he kept losing Super Bowls by increasingly large margin in the 80s. This is John Elway we're talking about. I mean, even if he hadn't had those, two late runs where he finally got over the line, with, ironically, Mike Shanahan, this is John Elway. Lads, this is ridiculous. So you kind of think that things like this, as you say, will be rectified, but then, as each year goes by, you begin to kind of go, well, actually, will they? Is there an agenda against Shanahan? Did he do something to somebody? Is there somebody out there that, because the only person that you immediately think of that Shanahan had a vendetta with is Al Davis, who, is long gone, and rest in peace, Al Davis. And he was certainly an interesting character, but, surely if there's a scrap, and the Hall of Fame voters have to pick Al Davis or Mike Shanahan, I'm sorry, given Al's history, there's only got to be one winner there, and he's not wearing silver and black, So I don't understand it, Colum. It's flabbergasting, and even Sean Payton was talking about it yesterday as well. So hopefully it'll be rectified fairly soon, because it is, I guess, alongside, say, probably Carl Mecklenburg, and Randy Gradishar, and both of whom you kind of begin to want. Oh, Gradishar got in, did he, Colum? As a senior, did he?
Yes.
Yeah, he did. Sorry,
He did. Eventually.
eventually, yeah. So, but Mecklenburg, I would guess, is probably now the most egregious omission, from a player point of view. But absolutely, you can. Mike Shanahan is more than deserving of a place, and it really should have happened years ago. The minute he was eligible, Colum, it should have happened.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think there has to be more to it, Stuart, that we're just not getting the information on. Because certain things are so baffling, and there's lots that goes on behind the scenes, and I think, in the fullness of time, maybe it'll come out, but sometimes these stories get buried. The Belichick piece, whatever you think of Belichick, whatever you think of him, and in his personal life, and some of the, shenanigans that the Patriots got up to, the reality is that he is he is so deserving of being in the Hall, and the reason he isn't is because Bobby Kraft is a very, very, very powerful figure in the league, and writ large. And I mean, he can almost bury stories in the
He's
media.
won 8
So
Super Bowls.
I
He's
know
won 8
exactly,
Super
but
Bowls.
but it tells you the power that Robert Kraft holds, and I mean, this is the reality: is that the NFL is a cartel, it's a closed shop. They're billionaires, and they get to do what they want. So I think there's more to it with Mike Shanahan, and maybe someday the truth will come out. But to say, like, he is beyond deserving. So hopefully at some point in the future it will be rectified, and obviously, Kyle, his son, obviously has had a difficult few weeks and months, and the the handling of that crash, and the way that information came out, really baffling. And obviously, I think I saw a report. I don't know if it's true, or it could have been a clickbait headline, but apparently the 49ers had more than half of their players have picked up some injury, or maybe an injury niggle during training camp. So this is a team, obviously, who have been truly haunted by injuries for years now. So yeah, that is. But with the coach now, yeah, the stories seem to be that he struggles with concentration at the moment, and obviously that is going to make kind of focusing and drawing things up more difficult. So we will see. That was it for me, Stuart, in terms of things to cover today. Is that it for you?
that's it for me, Colum. And I'm off on my holidays. I'm taking my now traditional week away when the Broncos play their first preseason game, which is tomorrow week. Is that right, Colum? Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
believe that that is the case. Now, the three games, the fact that it is three games in preseason now has kind of shaken things up a little bit because um, teams kind of wondering what exactly they're going to how to use it. Like it tends to be the second game seems to be where the starters get the most time. Um, and last year, I think the Broncos like the third game was really a kind of a free for all. Um,
Yeah,
so
but you just reminded me, Colin, that I should have brought up the intriguing QB2 battle between Jared Stidham and Sam Ellinger. So maybe it'll help us get to the bottom of that one. Because that's been an absolute ding dong nail biter of a battle all summer.
Um, well, at least it's QB2 QB3 battle. And not what we had for years. Um, Stuart and I, we'll be back after I guess after Stuart's holiday. And you can find Stuart over on Blue Sky S Road 123. I'm across social media at Colum from Cork. If you enjoy the podcast, please do rate, review, subscribe, or better yet, just tell a friend about us. All that remains to be said is go Broncos.
Go Broncos.